Welcome everyone to today's CSIA Partner Webinar, Top 5 Current IT/OT Applications for Edge Computing. My name is Holly Lundgren and I will be your staff host for today. For those of you unfamiliar with CSIA, we are a global nonprofit professional association with over 500 member companies in 40 countries. Our mission is to advance the practice of control system integration to benefit our members and their clients. Our vision is to ensure that manufacturing and process industries everywhere have access to low-risk, safe, and successful application of automation technology. CSIA membership offers members access to resources needed to attain and exceed business goals. To highlight just a few of our many member benefits, the Best Practices Manual guides control system integration companies in the setup and running of a solid company. Our business insurance program offers members an excellent insurance program for business owners, subcontractors, and more. CSIA Industrial Automation Exchange is the premier automation guide featuring system integrators and suppliers who provide industrial, manufacturing, and process automation solutions. For integrators and suppliers, it's a place to market their expertise. Clients will find white papers, case studies, capabilities, contact information, and engage in conversation directly with CSIA members. Please follow CSIA's online events calendar for all upcoming webinars, including both partner webinars and business webinars. You won't want to miss these opportunities to learn from the comfort of your own office or home. And for more information about CSIA, please visit our website or contact us at 847-686-2245. At this time, I would like to turn it over to our distinguished presenter. Please welcome John Fryer from Stratus.
Thank you very much, Holly. And welcome everybody today, and thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this webinar. As Holly said, really today we're going to focus on your current applications for edge computing, and this is actually the first of a two-part series. We'll have more information on that at the end. The second part, we're going to focus on what people are really doing with edge computing in and around what you might term true digital transformation applications. So we'll talk a little bit about setting the stage for what's happening with edge computing, in digital transformation industry 4.0. Talk a little bit about the sort of compute infrastructure that we're seeing in and around plants and how that's evolving. What are some of the key requirements at the edge, and then really focus in on some case studies of projects that we've been involved with some system integrators, in some cases around the range of products that we've got, a little bit about the products, not much that's there, and then talk a little bit about our partner solution program, which hopefully some of you may be interested in if you're not already members. Just a quick slide about Stratus. If you don't know us, we've been around for a good number of years. As a company, we have traditionally focused on building fault-tolerant computers. The industries that we've been involved with are anywhere where unplanned downtime is a really bad thing. So a lot of our traditional business is in and around the financial industry. We process probably about 70% of the world's credit card transactions. Again, an industry where you want to make sure you capture the transaction, you want to know that transaction's gone through. Public safety, another industry that we've had significant involvement in, but today really our focus is in and around sort of industrial automation, transportation, smart buildings, smart cities, anywhere where control is becoming increasingly important, where downtime is really a bad thing, and really we're all about edge computing these days. Perhaps as much, if not more so, than just the fault tolerance and availability aspects of the products that we supply. So just to set everything in context here, this is a slide. It's not one that I developed. It actually comes out of a case study of a company called Trelleborg, and it's interesting because if you look at the focus of CSIA this year, it's all about digital transformation. And in actual fact, Jose Rivera, the CEO CSIA, has pulled together a sort of task force around this, and he actually used this exact same case study. He has exactly this slide, it's just a slightly different format. So I figured this was a really good place to start about talking about, you know, what you need in order to be ready for digital transformation and where a lot of companies are today. And I think the important thing about this is, you know, everybody's fixated and focused on Industry 4.0, analytics, cloud computing, machine learning. You hear all the buzzwords. But I think the fact of the matter is, if you haven't laid the groundwork to get there, you know, in terms of having the right computer infrastructure, the right levels of connectivity, security, all these other aspects that go with it, it's very, very hard to get onto the sort of right-hand side where you're actually doing a lot of these real-time analytics capabilities. And again, you'll see in the case studies that we've got, they focus somewhat on what people have done to get that digitalization phase in place, and now how they're sort of starting to move in towards this Industry 4.0 aspect with getting some real-time visibility into what they're doing. And in the second webinar, we'll focus much more on the right-hand side in terms of what's going on. So in order to help me in terms of what we're going to focus on and what I should talk about in the webinar, we've put a poll in here. So if you just think about that previous slide for a second, we'd like everybody to see if they could, you know, give some idea of where a lot of your customers and prospects are in terms of this sort of path to digitalization and path to Industry 4.0. You know, 4 options we've got here. You've not started. You're still, you know, most of them are still planning. They're in that digitalization phase, so they've got controls. They're upgrading that infrastructure, both connectivity, compute, security. They've kind of moved beyond that in that visibility phase, or they've really gone beyond that. You know, now they're into some of these advanced capabilities. You know, things that you read about in the press that you see, frankly, a lot of large companies who've got time, money, resources in order to go out and do these, you know, predictive maintenance and apply machine learning techniques and use a lot of cloud computing in terms of that. And, you know, companies who've gone a long way down the path of IT and OT integration when it comes down to it. So I see we've got responses coming in. I'm just going to wait a little bit longer, see if we can get a few more people, because we've had a pretty good turnout today. And, you know, again, the more you can tell me where people are, then the better. Hopefully, I can focus my remarks on what people are interested to see. Just give it one more minute here. Okay, we seem to have stalled out at this point, so I think we'll skip to the results. So here's what you've told me. I don't think this is any surprise to me whatsoever. In fact, you know, if there is a surprise at all, it's how the percentage of people are still in the not started, still in the planning phase. They're still, you know, out there with maybe islands of automation, stranded assets. They've got some level of automation that goes with them. You know, bringing people into that computerization phase, and that's still a big part of our business here at Stratus. As you'll see, you know, we're heavily involved with this digitalization phase. So I think the place to start here is to look at, you know, how that sort of compute/application control infrastructure has evolved and is evolving over time, and what we expect to see happen. So, you know, left off, if you like, to the left-hand side here, we'll leave those people who potentially are in the planning phase. They've maybe got some stranded assets. They've got maybe some air-gapped capabilities around the plant, because what they've got is pretty old, or they're concerned about security or whatever it is. So this early architecture phase that we see on the left-hand side here, this probably represents a lot of what we've done, projects like this over the last 5 to 10 years, let's say. Certainly since 2010, thereabout. A typical infrastructure, it's got some level of connectivity across the DMZ. When you want to go across that DMZ into the enterprise space, IT really gets involved. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, there's often friction that occurs in this between OT and IT, simply because they have different priorities in terms of what they want, and we could talk about that all day, I'm sure, if we wanted to. Very much the current kind of architecture we're seeing people evolve to now, and this is really where we're starting to see edge computing play a much more significant role, is to move a lot of the applications, move sort of real-time analytics type needs, if you like, down towards the plant side, more into the control of the OT functions. Certainly, there's a lot of cooperation that's starting to go on at this level between IT and OT. You've potentially got the sort of introduction now of hybrid IT and OT capabilities. Organizations that have got people with IT skills that are residing in that OT organization, maybe you as integrators yourselves are really sort of, developing those hybrid skills, and we see a lot of our sort of advanced integrator partners who've got those sort of shared skill sets, and they can straddle that bridge between the OT and the IT side of things when it comes down to it. And I think that's a very, very valuable skill set that people are going to need in terms of that. And really, this is kind of where we've got a lot of focus as a company, is around companies get to this sort of current architecture that's there. I think the future, the predicted architecture, that's still evolving. You see one or two advanced companies who've really sort of broken down the gap between IT and OT. Frankly, in order to do this, it really does mean that you rely a lot on security, and you're comfortable with implementing security all the way from the IT side all the way down to the OT side. That's a big step, I think, for a lot of companies to take, but there's really a blurring of the what's in control and what's in data, because the analytics, companies and plants are becoming much more data-driven when you get to this predicted architecture. So there's a lot of IT-like capability and functionality that starts to come in at that point in time. But I think that's for the future. That's sort of not where we're really going to focus today when it comes down to it. I put this slide in. I suspect many people on the phone are very, very familiar with this, but really, our belief is virtualization is a key enabling technology for a lot of compute infrastructure, whether it's at the edge or whether it's elsewhere. I mean, clearly virtualization, containerization is fairly ubiquitous across the IT side of things. Up in the enterprise, it's increasingly making its way in to the plant side, into the edge. I don't think we've done a project in the last, certainly 8-9 years that hasn't involved virtualization. It just gives you so much more flexibility in order to be able to deploy new applications, add applications, adapt what's going on, consolidate capabilities, and make your networking infrastructure much easier. Really, it's a key that's there. And again, as we see, we've got this division here. If you look at the traditional Purdue model on the left-hand side, and in terms of what goes where, we're seeing a lot of sort of edge computing pushed down from the control room down to the plant floor, sort of out to remote locations. And we'll talk about that in the case studies that we have. So, over the years, one of the key questions that's come up, we've talked to a lot of people who've had, one application running on one IPC or on one server, so HMI, SCADA, other types of applications, MES, maybe they've got some thin client stuff, all running on different servers. So the attitude's been, well, if I lose one server, then I just lose one application, and I can kind of limp along and live with that. But if I go to this virtualization capability, I'm going to lose everything if that server goes down. What are my options in order to protect these implementations? And really, that's frankly been a lot of Stratus's business over the years, is providing simple, effective solutions that eliminate single points of failure, that are very, very easy to manage and maintain, versus the use of traditional IT solutions, which often require multiple pieces of hardware, multiple pieces of equipment, scripting, knowledge of what's going on the IT side, and frankly, they are sort of fail-over solutions. Most people can tolerate some level of downtime for a few minutes. There are some people who can't, just depends on the application. We actually get quite a lot of business from people who've had a failure at a critical point in their compute infrastructure, where they've just used a single standard server or a single IPC, and it's caused a lot of unplanned downtime and a lot of cost, and we get quite a lot of customers that way. And that being said, if you look across the spectrum of edge applications, we do recognize that a non-redundant implementation at a small sort of remote location that's not necessarily significant is a way to go. And as you'll see, if you look at our product portfolio, we now have non-redundant edge computing solutions that are built into that will give you a sort of common management and support infrastructure that goes with it. So in terms of, just to touch on the products that we have, because this will give context to the case studies, we really have two sort of product families at this point in time. ftServer product line, which is really, uses data center and IT type capabilities, so it runs industry standard and off-the-shelf operating systems and virtualization capabilities, highly configurable. It looks and behaves like an IT server, except that it's a fault-tolerant solution, i.e. it doesn't fail, keeps running in terms of that. So for those situations when IT does get involved, and they are involved in that decision-making process, they're very much part of what's going on there. ZTC is our latest product line. This is really, really designed for the plant floor, really focused on having a simple solution that OT people can go out and deploy and maintain. And we'll talk about a lot of the benefits to this, when it comes down to it. One thing to bear in mind with an ftServer is that, and again, with a lot of the Stratus solutions, people tend to just focus sometimes on the hardware cost. You really have to look at a total solution cost when it comes down to it. And I'll touch on that point as we get a little bit more detail on the product in a couple of slides. So we're setting the stage there. We said top 5 implementations. Let's get on to what some of those sort of applications are with a few case studies here. So the first one here is a food and beverage type of application. This is actually a nationwide cooperative. They've got probably, I think, about 50 or more plants across the U.S. They had very old infrastructure, lots of different infrastructure across all these plants that they'd sort of acquired over the years. And they'd reached a point where they realized they were getting significant unplanned downtime, spending a lot of time keeping old systems up and running. So they wanted a comprehensive upgrade. And they started with one plant. They sort of ran it as a pilot capability. And they looked at a lot of different solutions. So this was a real sort of rip and replace implementation from a control, compute and control perspective when it comes down to it. And again, you can see some of the options there. They looked at the IT solution space, with a range of vendors using VMware solutions across that as well. Even looked at the sort of server offerings, the IDC type capabilities that you get from Rockwell. And they never really quite met their requirements. Again, a lot of these plants don't necessarily have IT expertise in there, so when something goes wrong, they can be left high and dry till somebody can get out there. They really, really like the capabilities that the ftServer could have as a single ftServer, to run the entire plant in whatever configuration that they wanted. And, that was a solution that they've chosen. So they put this in an initial plant, very happy with the results that they've got there, and now they're rolling this out across all the plants that they have in the industry. And certainly I know that the initial plant they put in was implemented by, I believe, Melisco Engineering, who is a CSIA member in terms of that. So they're an excellent partner of ours. We've done a lot of work with Melisco, a lot of projects over the years, and they actually used ftServer as a differentiator in terms of proposing the solution to this particular customer. So the next solution, this is an interesting one. This sort of comes out of much more the discrete manufacturing side of things. And, it's a fairly typical story that I guess many of you get in the system integration phase. It's a company that's been in business, since the late 90s. They manufacture sort of specialized polyurethane foams, a lot of customization that they do for their customers. Over the years, as the industry's become more competitive, they've responded to that kind of capability in terms of that. But, like a lot of companies, their control solution has evolved over the years. Individual assets would become automated. So they ended up in a situation, in the sort of 2-3 years ago, where they really didn't have great visibility across what was going on all of the plants. So, they kind of described it. Jessica Spurlock, who's quoted here, we've got a video of hers on our website. You're welcome to go and watch it. That their plant was sort of operating in the dark. A lot of tribal knowledge has grown up around what happens and what goes on in the industry. So, if somebody retires, if somebody leaves the company, that sort of knowledge walks out of the door. Very reactive when something goes wrong. I'm sure you've heard all of these issues as you talk to your customers and prospects out there. And frankly, there's obviously in that kind of environment there can be a fair amount of sort of resistance to change when it comes down to it. So they looked at, again, alternative solutions, the typical virtualization server farm that's there. Again, deployment of this was in the plant. There's not a lot of space where this particular implementation has gone in. This one happens to be a Wonderware solution. They've put in the ftServer. Again, they've got a whole set of requirements here. And really, aside from not having downtime, they really found that the ftServer is a very, very cost-effective solution in terms of doing that. When they've looked at everything from a total cost of ownership, in terms of purchasing the equipment, the software licenses that come with it, I'll talk about that in a second, and the impact that this has had to their business, it's really been an effective solution. It's also enabled them to go to standardized control loops for various processes that they have. It's also enabled them to expand with a virtualized system. They can add more control capabilities onto the ftServer with that. And, one of the key things that they've experienced is a huge reduction in scrap and wasted product that they've had in terms of that. They continue to expand that. They want to now provide, move that step from digitalization to Industry 4.0 by start to provide KPIs and dashboards for the executive staff inside the company so they can get a handle on what's going on from the production perspective. So a very, very, effective kind of capability. They're deploying sort of thin client technology so that they can have, the right HMI type views at the right locations for each particular part of the production process or the different production processes that they have. So those are a couple of examples of, larger sort of control systems And really just to talk a little bit about the ftServer product itself. So as I said before, it runs industry standard software. So, Microsoft Windows as guests on top of VMware or on top of Hyper-V. One of the key advantages, and again, this is why I think you need to look at sort of total cost of ownership sometimes, is that with an ftServer, you only need to buy one license for VMware, one each for the guest operating systems that you've got. And internally, it's fault tolerant. It sort of looks, if you take the front panel off, as though there are sort of two servers in there. They work in absolute lockstep together, instruction cycle for instruction cycle. And if one of them happens to detect a fault, the other one takes over seamlessly. The applications are not even aware that that's happened. If you were to deploy a clustered solution or a VMware HA solution, you would need multiple licenses, one per server. So that's a big advantage that you can get with an ftServer, when you look across the whole spectrum of cost in terms of that. And, in both in the case of DFA and in the case of Rubberlite, they were really seeing that ftServer was a very, very cost-effective solution. It's self-diagnosing, it automatically takes care of itself. You really don't have to worry it's in that plant environment, particularly when there's no sort of IT resources readily to hand in terms of that. ftServer is a scalable solution. We essentially can, there are 3 models. It can size the product to whatever you want. So it can run from, the small ones probably run half a dozen VMs. We have, large systems which support over 1 terabyte of memory running hundreds of VMs. So it's a very, very highly scalable solution that we build to your demands. We can build in headroom so that you've got additional capabilities there. So before I talk about the ZTC Edge case studies, I figured we just put the product stuff in here now. So ZTC Edge, again, really designed for those plant level capabilities where ruggedization is key. So it comes as a ruggedized platform, unlike a lot of sort of IPC type pieces of hardware or ruggedized sort of servers that you're starting to see appear. Virtualization comes built in. It's pre-installed on the platform when you get there. The typical model, there are 2 of them that will provide you either a high availability capability, where there is potentially, in some situations, some downtime as you fail over, or there's an option now with our latest model to have fault-tolerant capability with, one of the VMs that's operating there. And typically, we say up to about 4 VMs on a ZTC. We actually now, because we've had a lot of customers who've come to us and said, hey, I really like this product. I want to deploy it, across a whole range of plant environments that I've got. We've got multiple customers, for example, in oil and gas, where they've got compression stations or, facilities spread across a geographic area. But they've said we don't need full redundancy in all our locations. There are some less important locations, so we've now come out with a non-redundant version of this. The real advantage is that they get a common, management and a common monitoring infrastructure that fits across their entire compute infrastructure, which really, really suits them very well in terms of that. So that's really a quick summary of the 2 products that we had. Key thing I think to remember, and one of the things I think that really differentiates Stratus, is the service architecture that we've got that fits around our products. So they're all self-diagnosing in terms of detecting faults. They will fail over automatically, unless you have the non-redundant ZTC model that's out there. They will keep running. They will call back to Stratus when it comes down to it, and when there is a fault or they believe that there is some degradation. It doesn't actually have to be a fault. They're self-monitoring in terms of that. If they believe that there's some degradation in capability, they can contact Stratus, and there are lots of ways that they can call back to Stratus. Yes, we do have air-gap customers, so we have to work around that as well. If we do detect that there is a fault, we will automatically ship out a replacement part. In all cases, everything is hot swap. So on the ftServer, it can be a disk, it can be one of the servers or slices that we call it. With the ZTC, it's a replacement box. It's all plug and play. You just unplug some cables, or you undo a couple of latches, slide out whatever's failed on the ftServer, or just plug in a new product on the ZTC, and the system will automatically resynchronize itself. No scripting, no taking anything down, no IT expertise required. In fact, in a lot of remote locations, operators can do this in terms of very well. And obviously, then we continue to monitor the systems. So both products really have this sort of, cloud-based support infrastructure that's available to them, and really is a key differentiator. It's very effective for a lot of our customers. And again, both the product and the service need to work together in terms of that. And you'll see in the next, the case studies now that we've got for ZTC, one at the end, how system integrators actually view this as a real advantage for them when it comes down to it. So the first ZTC sort of case study that we've got, again, wastewater treatment plant here. Generally an area where there's generally not a lot of IT expertise that floats around, excuse the pun there, with a wastewater treatment capability. People are focused on the quality of the water, piping in the ground. There's a lot of chemistry involved in terms of that. So that's the OT focus. There's not a lot of focus on the IT side of things. So there's a real requirement for ruggedized devices that can run independently, that can take care of themselves, and will kind of let you know when there's a problem, and that can easily be upgraded. And that's exactly what happened in this particular capability. This particular wastewater treatment facility or authority recognized they needed a ruggedized solution. They looked at what was out there on the market. Not a lot of support for virtualization in these devices. The standard virtualization options, it says there, were too expensive. They was going to push up the license fees in terms of what they got. And the Stratus ZTC fit exactly what they needed for this remote location. This one happens to be GEI fix. Again, autonomous operation, simplicity of the solution. A very, very happy customer that's been running, very easily for probably a year or so at this particular point in time. Again, another one, very much in the manufacturing space this time. Boiler controls for a timber processing facility. Again, a recognition. So, you'll see a theme here. A lot of these are, let's make sure that we can get all our basic controls infrastructure and automation infrastructure in place. Then we can look at how we might go forward into the visibility and sort of Industry 4.0 and digital transformation phase of things. So a lot of these are really laying the groundwork to what people may do in future. I mean, some of these implementations, some of these case studies may actually not go any further. They're designed for a specific purpose. They know what they need to do, and that may be sufficient for their needs. There isn't, something that says you have to go and implement Industry 4.0 or a true digital transformation. I think what's interesting about this particular implementation, when you look at the competitive factors here, this was, us working with one of our Rockwell distribution partners in terms of that. The ZTC was actually selected over Rockwell's own product or a standard Dell HP standalone system. It really fit the requirements of this geographically remote location where there's no IT, and they need the people who are out there to be able to service this, if there's a problem, and, the ZTC will take care of itself and will sort of, be able to report any issues that are going on. So common kind of theme that you see and get down in in that sort of plant environment, that real edge environment that's becoming increasingly important. So the last example that we've got here, the fifth one here, this is a brand new plant that was put in by a small sort of dairy ice cream maker in the, I think in the Atlanta region, if I'm not mistaken. Certainly, Kline Process Systems, who are mentioned here, they're a system integrator partner of ours. They're out of the Pennsylvania area. They were bidding on this project. They'd done work with this company before, but they were able to influence the specification in terms of what was needed. And for the size of project that it was, they came to realize that they could run the entire plant by using the Stratus ZTC. All right, so the 4 VM limit would work well for them. It would give them everything that they needed. There's less than 10K tags here in order to operate this entire plant. So, clearly downtime's an issue. I mean, levies themselves is not a sophisticated or an IT sophisticated operation. They know how to make ice cream, make it very well. I've tasted it. But really, running that control system, if there's a problem there or diagnosing it, that's not what they do for a living. They really don't want to be involved in that. So ZTC really fit their requirements in terms of keeping the operation running to minimize any sort of spoilage that they had there in terms of that. So one of the slides I wanted to put in, just to emphasize the point here, I've talked to Kline, I've talked to, Molisco many times, and you get the same kind of sort of responses to why do they want to work with Stratus, why do they see Stratus products as a real advantage. So there's two sides to this. One is from a system integrator perspective, all right, and making proposals, it really sort of helps them produce an effective proposal, and you can see the list here. So eliminates hardware, it eliminates cost, saves space in rack space. Again, through virtualization, you don't need multiple servers. If you want to get redundancy capability, again, saving again on the complexity of software licenses, and small though it may be in a lot of industrial capabilities, it's power consumption saver, particularly if there's a UPS aspect to that as well. There is the risk of power failures. The systems will keep running for much longer based on the UPS that you need there. And it's very much, set it and forget it. So it reduces, from an operational perspective, the amount of calls that Kline in this particular space gets, so they can focus on new projects, new business, generating new revenue, rather than constantly being diverted to support existing customers who happen to have some sort of a computer problem, that the customer is not equipped to address when it comes down to it. So, really there's cost and implementation benefits. There are operational benefits that you can get by using the Stratus capabilities. And these are not our words. These are words that are coming from system integrators that we work with. Before I finish up here, just want to point out that, again, as I said earlier, this is the first part of a two-part sort of webinar series. Here we focused on, if you go back to that early slide, so that computerization, connectivity, maybe moving into that visibility phase. In the second part of this, we'll talk about what some of our customers are doing who've moved, beyond that. They're starting to implement aspects of Industry 4.0. We don't really have anybody who's gone all the way to the right-hand side there, but we've got some customers who, in certainly in one case, for a year or two, have been really moving towards that sort of predictive maintenance phase, and we'll talk about that in the second part of this webinar series. Again, we're going to put that out in mid-October. So if you found this valuable, please register and come and listen to us at that point in time. Last slide I have before I'm going to turn it back and we can have one or two questions, I think. We've got some time is, we do have a solution partner program. The SIs we've talked about, Molisco, Kline, are members of that, along with, I think we've got what? I forget the number, but it's growing rapidly at this point in time. It's a real sort of focus for us to engage with system integrators like yourself to see how we can help you with that. There's a lot of training that comes with it. You get certification that comes along with that. You get support from Stratus as well when you've got opportunities. Although again, some of our key SIs know our products well. They can sort of bid them independently in terms we've got. We've got you help with sizing tools. So all sorts of different things that we've got a sort of partner portal that we've just revamped in terms of that as well. So I think everybody's going to get a copy of the slides after the webinar. So you don't have to write anything down here. The webinar has been recorded, so we'll be sending out a link to that. So if you have friends, colleagues who you think might be interested, please have them do that. And with that, I think we have time for a few questions. So I'll hand it back to CSIA at this point.
Hey, thanks, John. That was great. So we do have some questions here.
Yeah, I've seen a few come in, but with focusing on what I'm saying, I've tried to cover some of the points. So, but let's step through what you've got there.
Okay, so we have the difference between CTC Edge and an IPC. I'm not sure if you spoke on that yet.
Okay, so IPC, and we get this a lot. People see as ETC. There are sort of the ruggedized bricks that are out there. Some people call them IPC. So in our minds, IPC as a term in industrial PC covers a multitude of options. Sometimes all the way from small Raspberry Pi type devices to integrated HMI IPCs, all the way up to things that look like a PC and are ruggedized. But really, ZTC is much more of an edge server than an IPC. For one thing, it's integrated and supports ruggedization. For a second thing, it comes integral with redundancy capabilities, sort of all built in off the shelf. You kind of don't get that with an IPC. It's a more general purpose device that can be used to run control applications, automation applications. It can be used to run analytics applications on it. It can have security capabilities. It's got security capabilities built into it with its own firewall. So a lot of things you don't generally find with an IPC. So it really is, in our minds, quite a different device, even though it can look very similar to quite a lot of what's out there.
Okay. So we have another question. This all sounds good, John. From your point of view, where should someone start? Are there any recommended steps, any POC options available?
Yes, that's a very good question. So we, in terms of engaging with Stratus, and engaging with something like a ZTC, we have a proof of concept sort of capability and program that we have in place. A lot of our projects these days, because this is a new type of device, start with, I want to do a proof of concept. In terms of that. So we have a whole program around that. We'll help, use an SI, assess what the opportunity is, make sure that there's equipment available for it and go from there. One of the other options that we have, and it's very, very popular as well, is we have essentially a ZTC in a suitcase. Everything you need to get a ZTC system up and running or to demo it yourself, it comes in a hardened sort of Pelican case. It's got 2 ZTCs, it's got a switch, it's got cables, it's got power supplies, everything else you need. All right, ZTC will run off an external power supply. It will run off a DIN rail mount if that's what you want. But sometimes if you're demoing it, you'll just run it from a desktop or something like that. So we have a way that you can have your own demo system, very, very cost-effective way if you engage with it in terms of that. In terms of telling your customers how to get started, there are 3 sort of areas that we suggest people focus on. And two of them are really covered there in that first slide. First one is make sure you get your compute infrastructure right. So make sure you understand what applications you're going to want to be running, what you're going to want them to do, where you might want to go in the future. Going hand in hand with that is obviously, making sure that you've got the connectivity that you need in order to make all this work, so that, this edge infrastructure maybe that you're developing, or even if it's in the control room, that it has the right mechanisms and capabilities to communicate to the rest of the enterprise. Because, whether you like it or not, the days of air gapping plants in most cases are probably going to come to an end in the next few years. Competitive factors will drive the market that way. If you look at anything that's happened in the rest of the broader sort of computer industry or the IT side of things, how radically that's changed in the last 20 years, some of those changes are obviously going to come to the OT world as well. The third thing that we need to do, and it's often the place I think, people who are starting from a blank sort of sheet of paper go to, is make sure you get the architecture right. What is it that you're going to do where? Now, if you've already got islands of automation and you're bringing them together, you maybe are a little bit limited in what you can do there. So our experience is, it doesn't really matter which one of these things you do first. It could be a proof of concept around, some existing assets that you've got in terms of that. It could be, implementing connectivity across your plant to the existing assets that you've got. Or it could be, yes, we're going to start from the architecture. Doesn't matter where you start, but you've really got to do all of those three things if you want to get into that true digital transformation phase down the road.
Okay, thanks, John. We have another one. How many virtual machines can run each ftServer solution?
Okay, so I think I talked about that a little bit. An ftServer is a very scalable solution. We have three models, if you like, small, medium, or large. So generally with that, our partners or our system engineers come out and work with you, work with your customers to size what the application is, what applications you want to run. So it can be anywhere from, small ftServer applications will run, 6 VMs, let's say. Maybe less than that if you want to, if they need sufficient horsepower. They can run all the way up to hundreds of VMs. I know for certain a couple of years ago, I talked to one gentleman who was running a tire plant, and he got multiple production lines, and he got one of our larger ftServers, and at that time, he was still converting these production lines over to a single ftServer. He had 64 VMs, and I think about 6 or 8 production lines running on it already. And his comment at the time was, "Oh, it's hardly breathing." So, capacity tends not to be an issue with the ZTC. If you think about some of our big financial, customers who are running ftServers, and the amount of processing that they do for, say, credit card transactions, some of these things come pretty big. As I said, up to a terabyte of memory on large ones with dual powerful processors in them.
Okay. Thank you. So we have another one. What is the process size limitation of ZTC in general? What size plant may be able to run? Can it run a system with 1,000 devices, 10,000 devices? Trying to get a rough idea of the size of SCADA system it can handle along with database.
Okay, so this is a tricky one. So, ftServer is our original product. So as I said before, we can build it to, whatever specification you want. ZTC is a fixed configuration. So we essentially have two models out. So the 100i, which, there's a non-redundant version of that as well. That has 0.5 terabyte of storage in it, 32 gigabits of memory in it. In terms of that. And, as I said before, it runs the Libby's ice cream plant, with no trouble at all, and that's got about 10,000 tags in it. The newer model, the 110i, that has, I believe, I've forgotten, I think it's at least 2 terabytes. It may even be 4 terabytes of storage in it, all obviously solid-state drive. And again, we brought out that one because, and it'll run up to 6 VMs because we had, quite a lot of customers say, okay, yeah, I can see I can run my plant or my application, with a 100i, but what if I want to expand? People were wanting some headroom, so that was why we came out with a 110i. I think, if you're looking at will it run 1,000 devices, 10,000 devices, if you have a particular application in mind, I would advise you to come and talk to us. I think the system engineers and so on would be much better advised to tell you whether your application will run on a ZTC or which model might be suitable for it. But they are fairly powerful devices. I mean, our estimate is that for a lot of sort of plant level applications, edge applications, ZTCs can cover about 80% of the requirements that are out there at the moment. Obviously, we've got more models in development. Our big challenge is, do we make bigger ones? Do we make smaller ones? And we've got pressure from both sides in that. So, come and talk to us. We'd be happy to have a discussion and get you with the right technical people who've got experience with these things and experiences in the automation and controls market through implementations.
Okay. So we're going to have one more question here, and then we're going to have to wrap this up. We'll follow up and answer questions post-webinar. Is there a play for both ftServer and ZTC Edge coexisting in large multi-site digital command centers?
Excellent question, and to which the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, we've got several customers who are in that situation, right now. As I talked about earlier, one customer in particular sort of came to us with a requirement. They're in the oil and gas industry, and I think we should be able to talk more publicly about them fairly soon. But they were upgrading their sort of SCADA infrastructure in a lot of their remote facilities, and unplanned downtime was a real problem to them. So they came to us and said, this ZTC you've got looks absolutely perfect. So we engaged with them, and then they said, well, here's the sort of problem we've got. We don't always need redundancy in all of our locations. Can you have a non-redundant version? And yes, now we've got that for ZTC. But they said, we've got some larger locations, which are pretty important to us. Do you have a product that will fit that? Well, the answer is yes, it's the ftServer sort of product. And the real great benefit that they get from this is overall there's a common support and maintenance infrastructure that fits across it all. So they've essentially, for all their compute needs, right from the control room side of it to all their remote sort of edge locations, they got sort of one throat to choke. If they've got issues around that compute infrastructure, Stratus is the company that they can come to. And that's an implementation that's just going in. But it's not the only one. We've got a number of them that are going that way now.
All right, thanks, John. So on behalf of CSIA, I would like to thank John for this informative discussion. I'd also like to thank all those attending. We hope you found the webinar informational. When you close out of the webinar, a link will pop up to a brief evaluation. We would appreciate it if you would take a moment to share your feedback with us. We'd also like to remind you that a recording of this webinar will be available for viewing within 30 days of this event. Please visit the CSIA website to view this recording or a past webinar you may have missed. We'll have that up well before the 30 days. This concludes our program for today. Once again, thank you for joining us, and have a good afternoon.
Stand by.